Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Midwest Mountaineering Outdoor Adventure Expo. With me today, I have writer and small boat sailor Tom Pamperin. He's presenting on Around the Aulneau Peninsula, a small boat journey on the Lake of the Woods. Tom has done a few presentations for us already, and if you've missed any of those, you can definitely check them out on our YouTube page at Midwest Mountaineering to see all the other presentations we've done, including this one and the few left that we have for the weekend. So without further ado, here's Tom.
Hi, thanks a lot. I appreciate the chance to present again here at Midwest Mountaineering. That's such a great event, and I'm happy to continue being part of it. As you can see, my presentation's about a trip on Lake of the Woods, and kind of my purpose in doing this presentation is kind of twofold, as most of my presentations are. First, the destination itself. If you don't know much about Lake of the Woods, if you haven't been there, I'm going to do my best to put you in the boat with me and take you on a trip on this wonderful wilderness that's actually not too far away. And the second kind of ulterior motive I always have when I do a presentation like this is to introduce people to the idea that there's a mode of transport that you might not be familiar with, a wilderness transport, and that is a small sailboat, small engineless sailboat that can be rowed just as easily as it can be sailed. This is a niche sport, I guess, but it's kind of, I look at it as an alternative to paddling, right? If you, I'm getting old enough now where I don't know how many hours I can sit in a kayak, right? But when I get aboard a small boat like this, much more room, much more comfort, it kind of brings you the backpacking or paddling wilderness experience with the capacity of car camping. So my boat's carrying all the gear. I don't have to worry about packing ultralight when I'm on a trip like this. And so that's really nice. This opening image I picked, this was my first night on Lake of the Woods. No, actually it was, I'm not sure which grade it was anymore actually, but I think this really captures that mode of travel. So my boat is set up so that I can sleep aboard if I need to. There's a sleeping platform and a tent that goes over. But just as often when I have a nice beach like this, it's just as easy to beach the boat, tie it to shore, and camp ashore. So this photo here, you can see it, a couple of bags thrown on the beach, a tent set up, the boat tied up in perfectly sheltered water. This captures so much of what this kind of trip is about. So I'm going to bring you now aboard for a trip around the Aulneau Peninsula in Lake of the Woods. So the first thing we need to know is where and what is Lake of the Woods? So quick satellite overview here. Just west of Lake Superior, it's you can't really see the lake itself on this image too much. It's too dark, but right where that yellow arrow is pointing at is where I launched my trip from, the southern shore. So it's about 6 hours from the Twin Cities, 4.5 hours from Duluth. So that's where it is. It's like I say, you don't need to go very far really to pick up a good wilderness experience. In my youth, when I started backpacking, climbing, doing all that kind of thing, I typically was looking to the Rockies and the Sierras and the far west, places that could be a 30-hour drive, all along, not really knowing that within 6 hours of where I live, there's all these other wonderful wilderness opportunities. So that's where it is. You can see it's a big lake, the 36th largest lake in the world, and then they like to call it the 6th largest lake in the United States, even though only a tiny corner of it really is in the United States. But 25,000 square miles of shoreline, and that doesn't count the shoreline of the 14,500 some islands. So there's a lifetime or more worth of exploring on Lake of the Woods. So that's where the Aulneau Peninsula is. But what's the Aulneau Peninsula? I think of this when I first started looking at maps and satellite images of Lake of the Woods before I ever went there. You can't miss it, right? It's like this continent right in the middle of the lake. And it's a pretty big landmass, 600 square miles or so. And if you circle it by the red route that's marked here on the image, you're going to cover roughly 100 miles. There's so many different variations of routes you can take, it's hard to pin it down. But I think a good minimum would be around 100 miles if you wanted to circle it. So that's the trip I'm going to be taking you on. So launching from a little town called Morrison, Ontario. Not even really much of a town, but the marina's there. People are Canada. If you haven't traveled a lot in Canada, it's wonderful. The people tend to be laid back. I tell them I'm going to be gone for maybe a week and a half. Where do I park my car? Oh, just park it wherever. So it's just wonderful. So I launched, and this Sabascong Bay that you can see in the center of the image, that on my map, the palm of my hand can cover the whole bay. So this is pretty close to a life-size image, but that's 10 miles of sailing to get across this bay. So my first night I had in mind, this was about the extent of my planning. I had hoped to camp somewhere right around where Camp 1 is marked. So I didn't get launched until, probably early afternoon. You know how that goes. It's always slower than you want to be. And my morning start turns into a 1:30 p.m. or 2 p.m. start. But then I did launch in this tiny Hansen Bay, and I set out to the northeast. And here, I'm going to bring you aboard with a short video clip to show you the pure excitement of sailing. So you get days like day one was very, very light winds. This is how exciting it can be. And I say that a little bit tongue in cheek. I love this level of peacefulness. Like, I'm just sitting there. I am moving. You can see those ripples coming in kind of diagonally from the right. So that's because I'm sailing into a headwind. This is as close to the wind as my boat will go before I have to zigzag and go the other direction. So a large part of my first day, the afternoon, you can see it's just a gorgeous day in early August, I think this was. And a large part of my day is sitting in the boat, moving very slowly because the winds are light. And you can see I'm kind of seated on the edge of the boat, the same side that the sail is on. That's on purpose. So normally in a boat, you want to keep it pretty flat. That's the fastest it'll sail. But when there's not much wind, you sit on the same side of the boat, the leeward side of the boat that the sail is on. And that kind of helps the sail hold its shape. It helps the sail stay filled with wind. So I'm sitting there tilting the boat that way, because if I wasn't doing that, the sail would be flopping around all over. We'd get no power whatsoever. So a large part of day one, just not that exciting. And then you do occasionally, you can see here, you get some winds. But oftentimes when you do get good winds, you've got a headwind coming at you. And yes, you could zigzag your way back and forth. That more than doubles the distance you have to cover. And typically, in my boat at least, you're traveling at a slower speed when you're zigzagging into the wind. So it's a double whammy. You're going twice as far and you're going slower. So it's far more efficient to take out your oars, the ash trees as sailors call it, and you row instead. So this is what it looks like when you have wind, but the wind is in the wrong direction. Nothing there. It's wonderful, but typically this day was either light winds or headwinds where it just made more sense to row. And either way, it's not a hardship. If you choose the right kind of boat that does both equally well, shoot, if the wind's in the wrong direction, drop the sail, take to the oars. It's all good. You're out there on the water, you're quiet, you're silent, you're seeing lots of neat stuff. I did eventually, summer days are long, thank goodness. So it must have been after 9 p.m. when I got to the channel that I knew I had about a mile to go to where I planned to camp. So still had the light, but I knew that mile of rowing, it was probably going to be dark before I got to camp. Well, that's how it goes. That was day one. So day two, I'm going to start at where I camped, and I'm going to go north. And it turned out to be a very, very windy day, which actually was perfect because the wind for once was in the direction I needed it to be. Well, before we go to day two, we need to stop and step back and ask ourselves, wait a second, if this is a peninsula we're looking at, and it's connected to land with an isthmus, right? how do you circumnavigate something that isn't an island, right? Is it going to take a portage? Well, a canoe or kayak, that would be no sweat, right? You'd pick it up and you'd carry it over and then you'd keep paddling. My boat probably weighs over 300 pounds when it's loaded with gear. And there's no way, no easy way that I could portage a canal. Well, my chart that I was using did actually mark a canal on it, but I had heard kind of vague rumors that that canal had been filled in, a long time ago, and there was no canal anymore. There were also rumors of a hand-operated railway to lift boats over the isthmus, and I kind of on purpose, I didn't look any of this stuff up ahead of time on the internet. I didn't really try to find out what the case was. Was there a canal? Was there a hand-operated railway? Was it possible that it would be flat enough that I'd be able to roll my boat over on some rubber fenders and slide it over to the other side? I didn't really know what would happen, or would I have to turn around and give up on the idea of circumnavigation? To me, uncertainty, that kind of not knowing everything ahead of time, is what makes travel travel. And if you know everything ahead of time, well, that's tourism. So I didn't really know what I was going to get into. I was hoping there was a way to get over the isthmus. And indeed, when I got there, there's a Turtle Portage marine facility. That's a railway. You can see the rails running from one side to the other, and the isthmus is very, very narrow. This must have been where the canal had been, right? And it's just filled in. You can see in the larger photo here, there's a cart that runs on those rails, and you just winch it up and down. So my hope was, from the rumors I had heard, I would throw my boat on the cart, winch it over, and I'd be on my way. But when I got there, the truth always seems to be at least some element of surprise, at least in the trips I do. So I had camped right there, but I had gotten to the portage so late at night, and the mosquitoes were just horrendous, the worst mosquitoes I'd ever seen. I just ran ashore, set up the tent as quickly as I could, dived in, and spent my night killing mosquitoes. I didn't even look at the railway. When I woke up, this is the sign I saw: decommissioning, right? Decommissioned in 2019. Well, it was 2019. So this trip was a couple years ago. And I was like, okay, did that mean they're decommissioning it at the end of 2019 or at the beginning of 2019? I'm already thinking, oh, geez, might need a different plan here. And my hopes of the circumnavigation might have just been dashed. But I went ahead and I tried it, and it seemed to be working. So very quickly, obviously it went a little bit slower in real life. I sped up parts of the video and did some editing, but this is what it looked like. The cart, this is like playing at 3 times the speed, right? This flip. So it's pretty slow. You get to the top of the isthmus and you just kind of shove it over, and now you're lowering the boat. You can see there, my foot is on a little foot brace. That's a brake release. If you lift your foot, the brake automatically sets. You slide the boat into the water at the end, and that's what you've got. So an hour after I got up, I was on my way on the other side of the peninsula. Everything had worked out perfectly. I carried my gear across the isthmus. I loaded it back in the boat, and now I'm on the eastern edge of the Aulneau Peninsula, and it looks like the circumnavigation is going to work. So that day, I started out, by the time I got the boat in the water on the other side, had a beautiful wind, kind of a west-southwest wind, which is the perfect direction in a sailboat when you want to sail generally north. So it was just a perfect morning. This must be 8 a.m. or something, and I've got miles of sailing ahead of me, and there's nothing there. There's no other boats. There's no cottages. Can't hear any road noise or anything. Just wonderful. Along the way, so the luxury of when you've got good wind and you don't need to be in a hurry, you can stop wherever you want to. And Whitefish Bay, this eastern arm of Lake of the Woods, is probably about as remote as you can get. There's very few cottages or developments here. So I just stopped in at a couple of islands, and Lake of the Woods is right at the very far southwestern extremity of the Canadian Shield. And the Canadian Shield is this vast geological region throughout Canada and parts of the northern US where glaciers have come and they've scraped pretty much all the soil off of the land as they moved across the bedrock. So you get lots of bare granite bedrock exposed here, nice flowing shapes and domes. So I just climbed around on some islands, and of course, it's blueberry season. So in this particular island, I spent an hour gathering a hat full of blueberries. There's nothing better than being out there all by yourself and having an island full of blueberries that makes a perfect breakfast. So then it started to get quite windy. You can see kind of storm clouds showing up. But again, in a little boat like this, when it's getting to be a little windier than you like it, you can find a sneaky inside route. So again, drop the sail, and I took a little shortcut right along the edge of the peninsula here. And rowing like this, kind of a moderate pace, I'm not really exerting myself, comes in right around 2.5 to 3 miles an hour. So it's like a moderate walking pace, slow to moderate walking pace. And so you're not in any hurry, you're not going to cover ground fast, but you're still going to probably be faster than if you had to sail, right? Because the wind doesn't always come the direction you want from. So these compromise boats, these sail and oar boats that can do both, really give you a good advantage for this kind of trip. So I got through, and by the time I got to open water again, after rowing through that little bit of a shortcut, it was windy. I'm talking about as windy as I've ever seen it on inland waters. Just the wind pouring out of the southwest. If you look at the sail in here, so it's still coming from a good direction, but the wind was strong enough that it really wasn't a good time to be hoisting your full sail. So you can see the bottom of the sail here is rolled up and then tied off so it won't unroll itself. If you're not a sailor, you might not know, but that's what's called reefing. And why do sailors reef? Well, if you had your whole big sail up, the wind is going to press the whole sail, and that puts a lot of pressure. You can capsize. Your boat's going to be way overpowered, and it's going to start steering in every which way. And it's just kind of going to be dangerous and very stressful. But you can calm all of that down by making your sail smaller. So you just roll up the bottom edge of the sail, tie it off like you see here, and you keep going, and you're in perfect control. So we'll take a look at what that feels like. Later on in this day, you can see still, so I've got 2 of my 3 reefs tied in. I could roll up the sail a little bit more and make it even smaller, but I thought that 2 was about the right amount, and that proved to be just perfect. You can see here the winds are coming from behind me and slightly to the left. So this is a lot of wind, and I would be totally out of control and maybe capsizing if I didn't have my sail reef. With the sail reef, I'm not even holding on to the tiller. You can't see it in this video, but the boat is steering itself, and I'm just sitting and watching the scenery go by. Still haven't seen any cottages or any development except for one cottage early in the morning near the portage. So a really nice wilderness kind of Northwoods feel to that. And that's what it was like for, I don't know, several hours that day of strong winds pushing me along. Just a wonderful day. You can also see, this is a good picture to show you what it's like to pack a boat like this. So in the foreground, you've got the cockpit where I sit. So that's all clear. There's benches on each side, and you can put your feet in there, you can sit, you can roll there, whatever. And then the forward half of the boat is loaded down with 2 big dry bags. So these have a Ziploc seal. They're watershed dry bags. They're really high quality. They'll keep your stuff dry, and they're tied into the boat. And also up front, right at the foot of the mast, is 2 25-pound bags of steel shot for ballast. So this boat is narrow. It's really excellent for rowing, but it's not all that stable to stand up to a lot of wind without some ballast and weight. And keeping the weight forward like that, you also can see way in the forward behind the mast, you can just see a little bit of my anchor peeking out. All of the heavy stuff goes forward, that counterbalances the weight of the sailor who has to sit at the back where he can reach the tiller and steer. So it's just a marvelous setup. This was a great day of sailing. I had considered giving up on this day because it was so windy, but I figured I'd try it with the double reefing, and man, it was just completely relaxed after that. So if you're going to do this kind of travel in a small sailboat, a crucial safety feature is having a sailing rig that reefs easily. So you can reef it while you're out on the water. You can make your sail smaller if you need to. So I spent the whole day having the wind push me along. And in the evening, I had finally ran out of wind. Typically winds drop off to nothing in the evenings. So I had to end up rowing about a mile at the end of the day, but I arrived in this just wonderful sandy bottomed bay and tied up to shore, just like you can see here. And you hop out in shin deep water, carry your tent ashore, your gear ashore. Again, I could have slept aboard my boat, but when I have a nice flat tenting spot, I know I'm going to be a lot safer from the mosquitoes if I'm totally sealed up in a land tent. So that was day 2 of the trip, and probably, I don't know, they're all one of the best days. It's hard to pin it down, but a wonderful night. I did have a camp visitor come by. So when you're traveling in a mode of transport that's completely silent, you see this kind of thing all the time. And he was so unstretched, he didn't even bother slapping his tail when he disappeared. So you see minks and beavers all the time on these northern waters. It's just cool. So camp 2, that was where the beaver visited me. You can see I had been sailing almost northward, pretty much generally straight north for that day. So wind out of the southwest just pushed me along. I was expecting quite different conditions on day 3. So typically winds come out of the west, and I needed to go west now across the top of the peninsula. I wasn't sure what that would be like, but I thought it would involve a lot of headwinds, and I was not wrong. Really strong wind still, and yet I had to go into the wind this time. So just a short clip to give you a feel what this is like. Remember, when I'm zigzagging, this is the waves you can see are kind of coming in diagonally from the right. That's pretty much the wind direction. So I'm pointing as close into the wind as I can in my boat, but I'm going really slowly. If you watch the foam on the water, you can kind of judge the boat's speed. And I'm forced to cover more than double the distance I would. And typically, that's pretty splashy. So I'm getting cold water splashed on me, and I have to lean to hold the boat flat so we don't tip over sometimes in the gusts. I was hoping to find some ways to get some shelter out of the wind. So you can see here, I'm heading into the left, heading toward shore where there was a sneaky little narrow inside route that I hope would get less wind. And in fact, it didn't really work out that way. The wind was pouring down these narrow channels. So in that top picture, you can see eventually the wind got so strong that I just gave up. It was kind of pointless to try and continue. I rowed, and even rowing was hard. It was so windy, but I rowed to a little beach, a sandy beach. I anchored my boat offshore. I tied the back end to shore, and I ate some lunch, and I thought about what I was going to do. It was just too windy. It would have been stupid to keep going. And yet, it was early in the day. I didn't really want to give up on it. While I'm moving around here, you can see that giant snapping turtle here, and the classic Canadian shield granite, right? Exposed bedrock everywhere. This turtle was the biggest snapper I've ever seen. He must have been the size of a manhole cover. Just really cool. Eventually, I rowed into a more sheltered area, maybe a quarter of a mile further on the coast, and I anchored for, I don't know, a couple of hours and just sat in the boat, read a book, ate some snacks, and just enjoyed being out there. And I was hoping as evening came down, that the wind would drop. And it did. And I continued another 10 miles after that to my next campsite, which you can see is just this neatest little lily pond backwater, completely sheltered from all sides. You tie the boat right up to shore. As I was bringing the boat in, a couple of adult otters were scampering around on the shore. They were really curious to see what I was up to, and then they ran off when I came ashore. Carried my gear in, set up my tent, and boom, a perfectly sheltered night. You can see I sat out by my tent and just watched the sky until the mosquitoes finally got bad enough that I went into the tent. But kind of dramatic skies that never rained on me, but it had that kind of stormy winds, strong winds. And that was a tough day, long day, maybe 20 miles of headwinds, fighting the wind all the way. But because I was smart enough to realize how pointless that was, and I anchored for a while, then when I started again in the evening, the winds were, I was still a headwind, but they weren't so strong, and it was made good progress and for another 10 miles. So you can't really go into these kind of trips where you're relying on the wind with too much of a set plan. You kind of take what the weather gives you. You can see here Camp 3, that's where I spent that night, where I met the otters as they were coming in. And now I'm nearing the northwest corner of the peninsula, and I have some options. The red line that you see takes a route called French Portage Narrows, and it was the shortest route, so I figured, okay, well, I kind of had a schedule because I had some friends who have a cabin farther south on Lake of the Woods, and they had invited me to stay with them for a couple of days. That was part of my motivation for doing this trip that summer. So I had to hit them in the right schedule. So I was looking for the shortest route. I could have gone farther west and come down outside those islands, but it would have added another day or maybe even 2. So I thought I'd try French Portage Narrows. I didn't know ahead of time, because the chart, you can't see it in this view, but the chart actually shows both sides of land coming together and touching. So again, I thought this might be a case where you need to portage. Obviously, the title kind of suggests that it does, but I thought I'd risk it. I thought I would sail down and see, maybe I could, if it was a portage, maybe it'd be short enough I'd be able to get my boat over, or maybe there's a water route. I didn't know what I was heading for, but this was my plan. The thing about these narrow inside routes is there's not a whole lot of wind. So the first leg of the trip went pretty easily across that open water. And then I knew I'd be up for either very light winds or even rowing. As it turned out, over here, I started running into some cottages. So Lake of the Woods does have a lot of cottages and lodges. That first one here, I sailed right by. Must have been a commercial lodge, right? They've got seaplanes that they fly customers in. Wonderful way to spend the night. And then over on the right, you can see not everybody's quite so upscale. I think this was probably an abandoned cottage, but definitely the one on the right kind of, I've had a great fondness for those old kind of half-ruined cottages sailing by them. Really cool. So you're not actually completely remote and wilderness. There's people around, but they're pretty few and far between. And this was a mile before the entrance to the narrow part of the French Portage Narrows started. French Portage Narrows, you can see that bottom photo, that's the portage. So it is not, in fact, an isthmus. It is docks from both sides that nearly touch, but there's enough room to get a boat through. And I was very thankful for that, because it would have been a long row to go back 5 or 6 miles maybe. So I was really happy to see that I could just sail right through. And then the narrows still continued. That top photo is after that little crossing of the docks. So I spent the day, it's so narrow, there's not much wind, but also I can be pretty lazy. So I didn't bother rowing, even though it would have been a lot faster. Pretty much I sailing the whole day and rowing in a few spots where I needed to. But again, perfectly pleasant day. You can see the blue skies, kind of yesterday's stormy clouds are just gone. So by the evening, kind of the reverse of the typical pattern, A good wind had picked up just as I reached open waters. So this stretch here is called the Tug Channel. Let me see if I can back up a couple of moments here. So down here on the screen, just above the yellow Camp 4, this little wider stretch of water is called the Tug Channel. And that is historically a sheltered route. So the winds mostly come out of the west, and Falcon Island over here is blocking all of the wind. So this is where they would take tugboats with giant rafts full of lumber back in the logging days, and they would come down this route to get the logs, would not have to face a lot of wind along the way. So by the time I got to the Tug Channel, the wind was a little more northerly, so the wind was pouring down, but it wasn't so strong as to be unpleasant. And again, the wind is coming from behind me, so it's perfect sailing. So you can see the sail here is unrolled all the way to its full size, about 85 square feet. And I'm just moving along effortlessly. Again, I don't even need to steer. My boat steers itself. It's got a little line and bungee that holds the tiller steady. So just a wonderful day. And nobody around, no other boats, no cottages on this side. Might have been much farther in the wilderness for all I knew. I arrived at the end of the Tug Channel just as evening's coming down, and you know, you get tired after a long day of sitting in a boat. So I'm always looking for a sheltered place to come in, spend the night. And again, I found it. So seeing where the boat's tied up there, the wind is pretty much blowing right toward the front end of that boat. So the land behind me in that photo is blocking all of the wind. You can see there's hardly any ripples out on the water at all. So that's typical. These boats are so small and they're so shallow. So that boat can float and sail in 7 inches of water. So here you see me pulled right up on a sandy shoreline, tie the boat to shore. There's a small anchor, actually a seaplane anchor, a little folding anchor out the back, just so the boat doesn't get washed up on shore. And then in the evening, you're free to just wander around and explore the islands, take a swim if you feel like it. The water was cool, but swimmable. And then you can see in the bottom right-hand photo, sometimes you just get a chance to pay attention in a way that you don't normally for life ashore. So would I notice the spider weaving a web in my backyard at home? I don't know, maybe if I wasn't too busy or on my way to rush to work or do something. But when I've got nothing to do but set up a tent and enjoy the evening, well, then I wander around with my camera and I notice a lot more. And there's no noise, no worries. The most complicated decision I'm facing at this point is, what do I want to eat for supper? Do I want to, that's really about it. And, which direction do I want to lay out my sleeping bag? Do I want my head over here or my head over there? When life comes down to things that are that simple, that's a good life. I really enjoy, and I think by this time here now, a few days into a trip, I've kind of left behind all the stresses and all the worries of shore life with its much more complicated decision making. And I just really start to come to life in a way that I don't in other settings. So this would be equally a good trip for paddlers, of course. For those who are not as lazy as I am and don't mind paddling 100 miles around the Aulneau, definitely the water's sheltered enough that would be a perfectly reasonable trip for a canoe or kayak if you pay attention when you do have the occasional big water crossing. You get to a camp like this and it's all worth it. So that was 4 days, and Camp 4 I had luckily, I had managed anyway to keep the schedule that I had planned on. My friends were waiting for me somewhere on day 5 or day 6 of my trip was when I had set aside that, I'll arrive at your cabin on these days. So the red line here is, again, what I think I'm going to do for the next day. And again, you're gonna take what the weather gives you. But the beautiful thing about day 5 here is that with westerly winds being the prevailing winds, I'm going to have the wind mostly behind me as I sail down. So this is kind of a long sailing day. Ended up being probably over 20 miles by the time I got to my cabin. So camp 5, 6, and 7, you can see I just have a question mark there. That's because those are the days I stayed with my friends at their cabin, and I just want to respect their privacy a little bit. I'm not going to identify exactly which island. There's hundreds of islands and lots of cabins and cottages out there. But somewhere in that general region, they had their cabin is the only one on the island. So they pretty much have their own little island kingdom. And I was really looking forward to, as much as I like being away and being out in the wild with the simplicity it brings, I was also looking forward to spending some time with friends in a little more civilized setting. And, enjoying a shower instead of a cold swim, a hot cooked meal that was more complex than you could make in a little 1-burner backpacking stove. So a lot of reasons to look forward to it. But when I woke up, it was just a gorgeous day, probably the best day weather-wise of the whole trip. So we'll back up one. You can see that where the red line kind of makes a detour inland and then back out. So that's Sandy Bay. And this is, I had already been aboard the boat for a long time here. And, I just like really wanted to step ashore, stretch my legs, do some exploring, maybe go for a swim in the hot part of the day. And Sandy Bay sounded like maybe it would have some beaches, as indeed it did, aptly named, all sand bottom. So I sailed up. And again, on the picture on the left, you can see that I've got my sail rolled up. 2 of the 3 reef points are rolled in. It's because the wind is very, very strong again today. It's behind me and it's pushing me along. It's not dangerous because I've made the sail smaller by reefing it. So a double reefed sail like this, I would say it's probably about 55 square feet of sail exposed to the wind. Whereas if the sail were unrolled all the way to its full size, it would be 85 square feet. So you can see when the winds perk up beyond what's reasonable, the ability to make your sail smaller really keeps things unstressful, relaxed, in control, and safe. So the wonderful thing about this kind of sail is you get to a beach or you get ashore and you just drop the sail. You lower the halyard, the sail drops right down into the boat, and I put an anchor on the shore, and there I am. I'm free to do whatever I want. So I wandered around the beach. I explored a little ways into the woods. I took a long swim, probably swam for, about an hour out to that island you can see there and back. And I was just finishing up my swim when some fishing boats came into the bay, and I figured that was a good sign that it was time to move on. Just a gorgeous day. Windy, hot, sunny, all of that together, blue sky weather, perfect day. So by the end of the day, wind was really strong all day long. Like, had I not been reefed, it would have been quite a bit too much for my boat. But as it was, perfectly in control, this is where I arrived. I had never seen my friend's cabin before. They had marked it for me on a chart, so I knew where I was going. And they had said, well, if you think you're going to arrive that day, we'll keep an eye out for you. And sure enough, I got to within about a mile of their island, and I spotted them out there, and they have a dock and a beach, and they were out on the dock, and I sailed right up onto the beach, and it was a nice reunion. I sailed up. They had met me right down at the water's edge, and I anchored my boat in their little sandy bay and enjoyed a few days of civilization with them. So you can see they've got a couple of cabins on their island, and that cabin on the right here, right in the center of the photo, that one was all mine. Like, I had no idea. I thought maybe it was going to be kind of a 2-room cabin that they were willing to squeeze me in. No, quite a bit different. They had the main cabin off to the left, which just appears in the photo here. And then this little 2-bedroom cabin right there in the center of the photo they just gave that to me. So I had a bed, I had hot showers, I had cooked meals, fresh produce, all that kind of good stuff. And just a good time hanging out, playing some games, playing cards, talking, reading some good books, trading books back and forth. Got a chance to take my friends out and sail around their island one evening. Super duper light wind, but you know, that's a nice change. In my boat, most of the trips I do, I'm all alone. Sometimes my brother comes along in a similar boat. Um, so it's really nice to invite a couple of people aboard and kind of have some company, some crew. So we had a good few days spending time with my friends on their island, and it just kind of was a really nice finish to the trip because I knew I would have one more day to get back to my car and trailer. So you can see again, I'm leaving the location where my friend's island is. I'm kind of leaving that unsettled. But when the time came, it's knew it was about 10 or 12 miles back to the launching point. Along the way, so you'd think we're only 10 miles away. I've made it the whole way. No, I ended up actually misreading my map a little bit, getting a tiny bit lost somewhere in all those islands, and suddenly realizing I thought I had known where I was all along. You start to look around and nothing is matching what you're seeing on the map. It took me, probably a couple hours to backtrack my way out and figure out where I had gone wrong. But it's a good time to make a mention of what navigation is like on a trip like this. So this chart you're looking at is probably the size of a kitchen table. It's a big piece of paper and it covers the whole Lake of the Woods, the whole thing. You can see the scale here is 1 to 150,000. So for every 150,000 feet in real life, you get 1 foot on the chart. So it's a 3 foot by 3 foot chart or something like that. It's quite large. So I folded up to a tiny square for the day. And that's all. I don't use a GPS. I find that screens are too addictive. And then when you have a screen aboard, people tend to be watching that. And they kind of, for me, it loses part of the joy of the trip. And I also really like following along on a paper chart and kind of forcing myself to pay attention all the time. Where am I? And if I'm not quite sure which island is which or where exactly I am, I carry a hand compass tied in, of course, so if I drop it won't go overboard. But I can pull out my hand compass and take a bearing. Oh, that island is due north. It must be this one here on the chart. So it's kind of a nice little fun mental puzzle play. But as I said, I was apparently missing a few pieces of the puzzle on my trail the next day. Again, it was a pretty windy day and must have just gotten confused, lost track for a minute. And I turned down one channel that I thought was a different channel, but I had ended up turning a mile or two earlier than I should have. And then nothing made sense for a while. I got all confused. And it's really kind of a luxury to be in that situation where you're like, I don't know where I am. Like, how often does that happen? And this was not in any way really a threatening situation, right? I knew I wasn't in any danger. I knew if I just headed south by my compass, eventually I'm gonna hit that open water and find out where I am. So there's no way I can really stay lost on an inland lake. So, but it's still unsettling enough to make me realize just how precious an experience it is to be able to get yourselves lost. In our world where information is so easy to come by, limiting yourself on purpose, I just thought it was the coolest thing. Like, I made this whole trip, and not until the very end, when the car is practically in sight again, I got lost anyway. And I thought that was so cool. So, as a solo sailor, of course, it's pretty difficult to get shots of your boat in action. Occasionally, I have done things like set up a tripod and a timer and gotten photo, but that kind of destroys. If I need to get a photo of myself sailing, sometimes I'll do that for a magazine article or whatever. But it kind of does get in the way of the experience. But on this trip, I had the luxury of my friends standing on the end of their dock when I'm sailing away, snapping a few shots. So this is the view from their dock as I'm sailing away after spending 3 nights at their cabin with them. They're wonderful hosts. And then after getting lost for a while, I did finally make it back to my car and trailer. And so often it just seems to happen that just as evening is really settling in and I'm ready to be ashore, a campsite reveals itself, or you get back to the loading ramp and you're there. So feel really lucky to have had a chance to do this trip. Take a quick look overall what it looked like. So again, leaving out that segment where I visited my friend's island, you can see I start and finish at the same point. So thanks to that marine railway, it's a true circumnavigation. I can actually get all the way around the peninsula, which for me, that is so cool. What's one of the attractions of being in a boat is circling something. So that's great. Day one, you can see I started in the afternoon, pretty short day, only about 10 miles. But day two, look at that. So day two is a long, long day. Probably, if I had to guess, might have been closing in on 30 miles for day two. And that was largely because the wind is coming out of the southwest the whole day. So it's partly behind you and you're just pushing your boat along at top speed, which really is effortless, right? You're sitting there, maybe nudging the tiller now and then to steer, but it's really an undemanding, physically undemanding day when the wind is behind you. So that's by far, looking at it, the longest day on the trip. Day five was also a pretty long day, not quite as long, but over 20 miles, I would guess. And again, the reason is the wind's coming out of the west, it's behind you, it's pushing you along at speed. And then you look at day three, where we're heading straight west into westerly winds. And if you don't do a lot of boating, this might not be obvious to you, but just like in a river, the narrower the space that the wind has to go through, the faster the wind tends to be. It gets funneled into these narrow channels. And really, that day was a battle, and you can see it was the shortest mileage of the whole trip. Day four, also pretty short because, again, I'm in narrow channels and I just didn't have much wind at all. And I was too lazy to row. And that's the whole trip. I want to take a moment now before my last comments, and just to mention that this trip, I really want to pass along a thank you to my editor, Chris Cunningham at Small Boats Magazine. This is an online publication where I had written an article about this trip. So some of the photos that you saw in this presentation were first published by Small Boats, and I want to thank them for their permission. If you're interested in paddling, sailing, boat building, this kind of wilderness travel, you should definitely check out Small Boats. I write from them from time to time whenever I have a good trip, but I read every issue because every issue's got an adventure where somebody is writing an article about a trip they've done. Gives you a lot of ideas about things that you could be doing the next time you get a chance to be on the water. So overall, 100 plus miles. I don't have a GPS, so this is really kind of a rough guess, but that's a pretty good, I would say, average speed for this kind of travel. When you're in a small boat for sailing and rowing, I find myself averaging about 100 miles a week is pretty typical. And that gives you plenty of time ashore to stop and explore and spend some time in your campsite. On another trip, if I had not had a schedule where I had planned to meet my friends on a certain day, I probably would have done some rest days or some shorter days. But a day, it's like a great luxury when you can leave your tent set up and all your gear on shore and you do whatever you want. You can take the boat out and go for a row or a sail if you want to explore the local waters, but you know you're coming back. You don't have to load up and break down the camp and all of that. So on a normal trip, I probably would have spent 7 days anyway, even if I hadn't spent 3 nights in the same place, just spreading around the rest days to different places. I felt like this was kind of like the minimum amount of time I would have wanted for this trip. And for any trip, really, I find that if I get into it for a week or a little more than a week is kind of the minimum time for my body and brain to do that total reset of getting into the wilderness experience, dropping the stress of life ashore, and just kind of settling into being there in the moment. So that's the trip. I really encourage you, if the Canadian border opens again, obviously that's the big if right now. But if you haven't explored Lake of the Woods, it's like I say, it's only 6 hours from the Twin Cities. So it's not quite in our backyard, but it's certainly a lot closer than most. And this could be kind of your gateway drug to exploring the waters of Ontario. You've got Lake of the Woods. Just north of Lake Superior, you've got Lake Nipigon, which is an even bigger, wilder, more remote lake. You've got Lake Superior itself, the North Shore, which has all kinds of sheltered islands and bays, the Puckasaw. You've got the northern eastern edges of Lake Huron. So really the Canadian Great Lakes and the bigger lakes in Ontario north of the Great Lakes, they're well worth checking out if you haven't been there already. So I think at this point, this is about all that I wanted to share with you. That was an 8-day trip. So add in a day of driving on each end and 10 days. That's a big investment, right? If you're planning, I get 2 weeks or I get 3 weeks of vacation every year, spending 10 days on a boat out on Lake of the Woods might seem like that's a big investment. I'll tell you what, from my perspective at least, it is a big investment, but is definitely worth it. And I will be going back as soon as the Canadian border opens again. I'll be going back to Ontario to explore the waters everywhere. So the last comment I'll make is the boat here that you see in the photo. This is a boat that I built myself. A lot of help from my brother, actually, probably about a 50-50 deal. But that's pretty typical of this kind of travel. If you're going to have a small sailboat equally suited for sailing and rowing, in Great Britain, in the UK, and northern France, there's a big culture of that. You can probably buy a boat designed for that kind of thing. But almost all of the sailors I know in the US who are involved in this build their own boats because nobody makes them. And if you do have a chance to catch the YouTube channel presentations, I did a very quick overview on backyard boat building. And if this seems at all interesting to you, I encourage you to check out that. It's just a very quick overview of 6 different methods of how you can build a boat. And please believe me when I tell you this, my expertise level here, the value I bring to this is that I have no expertise. So you know that if someone like me can build a boat like this and do this kind of thing, then you can too. Clear space in your garage, set up a temporary shelter in your backyard. If your wife's not looking, clear out the living room and build a smaller boat in there. I've done that. It all works. There's always a way to do it if you're interested. So you can see my website here if you do want to follow up. I'll be posting a few follow-up things. Some of the things from my boat building presentation are already there. So if you want to look at that and get a little more information along there, you can find it there. I'll also put a link up to Small Boats Magazine in case you're interested in hearing more about this kind of travel. And I think at this point, I'm guessing there's probably not any questions in the chat, but I'll just leave a moment if someone wants to step in with a question.
Hey, Tom, can you hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. We've got a couple questions.
Okay.
Someone says, not sure if this was covered. Is the peninsula public land and are campsites designated? Do the campsites have fire rings, a biffy? I'm assuming they're talking about like a little fiberglass toilet, etc.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So the most of the land and all of the land that I was on is Crown land. So I believe you buy your permits ahead of time, and I believe the last I checked, they were $10 a night. And then you're free to camp anywhere on Crown land, but there are no developed campsites. So you're not going to find a campsite with a fire ring and a toilet. You're just going to be setting up on your own. So that really kind of limits you to, are you comfortable backpacker style, digging your own cat hole far away from the water? And that can be a challenge on smaller islands. You might not be able to get far enough away to really justify digging a cat hole.
Yeah.
I have switched because waste management, that's such a crucial topic. I've actually switched to a little 3-gallon bucket toilet with wag bags, the disposable. They've got the poop powder in there. And so for a trip like this, I can carry along sealed bags in a compartment that I don't open for anything else. That's how I handle it.
Yeah, and then I guess you always have a seat with you. In that sense.
Yeah, well, and the wonderful thing about this is I also carry a nice comfy camp chair because
Yeah.
I'm basically car camping because my boat can carry a lot more
Yeah.
than I can.
Great. That was a great question. Thank you for that reply too. There's another one here. Can you talk a little about the features of the boat? It looks like a Whitehall.
Oh yeah, that's a good eye. Somebody knows what they're talking about. This boat is very much based on a 19th century Whitehall. If you don't know that term, these were traditional kind of shore to ship boats on the east coast of the US. And they were really designed, they're like the pinnacle of boating technology before the internal combustion engine came along.
Hmm.
So they were designed to be able to be sailed or rowed quickly. In those days, it was quick. And still be able to do all that while carrying a heavy load. So for instance, this particular boat is 18 feet long. It's designed by a Canadian designer named Don Carilco, and he designed it, I think, in 1990. So I bought plans from him, I built it. The boat weighs about 250 pounds empty, but it's got a displacement of 425 pounds. So if you
Wow.
load it up to 425 pounds, it sits 7 inches deep in the water. But if you load it 700 more pounds, so 1,100 pounds total weight, the boat only sinks another inch, so 8 inches of water. So these Whitehalls were renowned for being able to carry tremendous loads. So they would ferry people and crew, or people and cargo, and they would even be used to send out a newspaper man. If you wanted to scoop the other newspapers, you'd send one of these boats out to meet the ships before they came into harbor because they were fast under oars and sail, and you could get there before the other reporters and scoop them. So yeah, they're definitely, this is very much a Whitehall.
Very cool. That was a great question. A lot of
Yeah,
a lot of history there in that answer. Thank you for sharing that. Really
sure.
intriguing. I love the I've actually never have sailed, but watching your presentations here, I really love the just sort of, I don't know, the cadence of it all and the sort of the aesthetic. You made a comment earlier about kind of just being tired of sitting in the boat. Big journey like this. Uh, are there? I mean, I think in canoes and kayaks, one thing that we find is that you have to kind of find a way to move in the boat to keep your body moving and not from keep it from cramping up or soreness, etc. What sort of comfort? I know you said you're basically a car camper, but what's one of your biggest comfort items that you bring aside from like maybe your sleeping or tent system?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. Um, Comfort comes, I guess that's two terms. There's comfort aboard the boat,
Hmm.
so I can talk about that. For comfort on land, I guess I'm enough of kind of like a caveman mentality that the firm surface is actually really good for me. So I take along 2 yoga mats. I don't use an inflatable or anything because typically I don't find those reliable. So I'll lay
Yeah.
out 2 yoga mats, and even on a bare granite, that's really comfortable for me. So I just am really lucky that way. My body likes the firm ground.
Nice.
Um, because I'm not carrying anything, 2 years ago, I just started kind of taking along a comfortable folding camp chair, and
Hmm.
that makes a difference. For me, now that I'm almost 50, getting my butt above my feet is really key to comfort. If I have to sit on the ground, that's a little tougher on me.
Yeah.
So but the boat, when you're on the boat, sometimes I'll be sailing for 7, 8 hours a day if you want to make miles. The boat steers itself. That's the number one comfort thing. I've got a little line and bungee. If you're a sailor and you're interested in how I manage it, it costs less than $1 to set up. There's not really any hardware involved. But that means that I can be both hands free. I'll clean off the sheet unless it's a really gusty, dangerous day. I cleat it off with a quick release so that the sail doesn't need my hands on it, the tiller doesn't need my hands, and then I can stand up to stretch out. I can sit on the benches sideways. I can sit facing forward. I can even, if it's a windier day, often I'll sit down on the bottom of the boat on the keel in the back and put my feet up on a bench. It's just, there's so much more freedom to move around than in a canoe or especially a kayak, that I'm really able to stay comfortable for long days on the water.
Very nice. Yeah, that looks great. I thinking about your comment about some of these smaller islands, and as you're kind of describing what some of these islands are, and they're even more primitive than a site that you would find in the boundary waters. I mean, no fire ring, no latrine, no trail to the latrine because there's no latrine. So I think that comment you made of it might be hard to justify digging that cat hole. We should be following those leave no trace principles and 200 yards and all those sort of reminders of that. So yeah, just I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, the whole issue is so important, especially because so much of my travel is near water. I really concluded that for me, the only responsible option was to pack it out. That kind of, I've done a few trips on the Grand Canyon, and that seems like, well, you're required to do it there. It seems like a no-brainer to me now. It's not really that much trouble. There's a lot of methods to allow you to do it without making it a big burden.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think there's a hesitation, and I think sort of in a way a stigma about like, oh, I have to pack this out, and I think people once they kind of maybe do a little bit of research, find different ways to make it efficient and hopefully mess free. It's super easy. So
yeah, it really is. And now I carry along one extra 3-gallon bucket for a toilet that I didn't used to. That's no burden whatsoever.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's not very much. Yeah, yeah. Well, great, Tom. I don't see any other questions here. I dropped your website in the chat here.
Okay.
I got a couple viewers out there. If you guys have any last minute questions, definitely drop them in the chat here. We're probably going to sign off in just a minute or two here. But you can contact Tom through his website, tompamperin.com, which I've listed there in the chat box. Just want to say thank you for your presentations. These have been wonderful, and we're not a sailboat kind of shop, but I love the journey and the adventure aspect of it. We obviously have a lot of gear that crosses over. So if you're interested in water sports or camping or hiking or backpacking, come check us out at Midwest Mountaineering, and we'll happily get you outfitted to pursue your outdoor adventures. So.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. There really isn't gear for small boat sailors, so I rely on shops like Midwest Mountaineering for everything I need on these trips. It's really nice to have, and cook custom sewing. I know you do a lot of their stuff as well.
Yeah,
so
Dan makes some amazing products. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah,
I'm wondering if you'd be interested in making you a sailboat cover.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. I'm actually doing a do-it-yourself one right now, but still nylon, very much inspired by the things I've seen in your shop, the custom sewing. It's going to be a tent that covers the whole boat, giving me much more room aboard. So
very cool. Well, maybe we can have the boat and the tent or the cover maybe at one of our live expos here in the future on a trailer or something. Cool. That'd be really cool. I'm sure people would love to see that. So let's connect about that in the future here. But I think for now we'll sign off. Thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate your time and your willingness to share all your information. And I look forward to connecting with you again.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Yep. Bye now.
All right.